Up to now, we have utilized this input box to do two-way data binding. In other words, whatever is typed into the input box, all we needed to do was change a property string to the new string, and then that new string was updated in our F4 in our template. Now we have a little bit more of a challenge, and that is that we have to do more than one thing when somebody types something into the input box. Now there's more than just changing a filter, changing the list filter string. Now we actually have to run some code that will take that string and look in the product name for matches, change the filtered product to just the filtered matches, and then our page gets updated. And so now we've got a little bit more of a challenge where we need to actually run a function, because a function does more, it gives us the ability to do more than one statement. And that's where we're headed next in this video. So I'm going to, just for visual, I would leave, if I were you, I would leave the list filter property up with all of the other properties. But for visual, I'm going to move this down to the bottom and put it underneath a function just so I can see them side by side while I'm doing this demonstration. Not necessarily good practice, because again, your properties should all be by standards up at the beginning of this class, and then your functions down below. But for visual, I moved it down. All right, so what I want to share with you is, let's think about this. In past, when we have made some changes to, for an input box, for example, we could fire off an event called onChanges, and every time the onChanges event fired, then we could be doing some code, and that is a possibility. But I'm going to introduce you to something else called getters and setters. And if you're familiar from other languages what a getter and setter is, it's the same concept. If you're new to getters and setters, that's okay. We're going to do them here. I acknowledge that I have some red squiggly lines. I was expecting that. So let me express to you what's happening here. To get rid of my red squiggly lines, I'm just going to give this list filter property a different name. And for convention, I'm going to give it an underscore, because really what I want to do is tie this underscore list filter to this getter list filter and the setter list filter. And I don't really understand all that yet, but just kind of bear with me and recognize that now, because I've bound list filter, this word list filter, to my input box as well as my F4, I assume you know what I mean by that F4. That's the where I filtered by right here. Oh, I thought it was an F4, but wait, where is that? Oh, here. List filter. Here's my F4. Yeah, H4. I keep saying F4, don't I? H4. All right. So I've bound my input box with list filter to a property called list filter. So now that property is in with my getter and setter. No longer here with this underscore, because underscore list filter is not the same thing as list filter. So list filter is now bound to my input, and it's also to my H4. But now it's being set and retrieved from something called get and set. So what's happening then is, anytime list filter changes, which is when somebody types something in the input box, anytime list filter changes, set runs automatically for us. So set and get are keywords, and set is that property. So the property's changed, so I need to do something. And what's happening here is the value that was entered in the change, whatever got changed, is going to be put into this argument, or this parameter. It's expecting to be a string. I'm expecting it to be a string. And so when I receive that value, that change, and this setter runs, then I'm going to update this underscore list filter to hold that value. Okay? So that's not going to change my list filter here. What's changing the list filter here is that because I have a getter and setter, the template says, oh, input changed, the input box created a change, and therefore I need to retrieve that change. So that's a get. I need to get that value that got changed. So this function already runs, automatically runs, and it's going to return, this function is going to return whatever is in this underscore list filter. And so the new value is going to be updated. So let's just see if that works. First of all, I'm going to put the word rake in here, and it is working. So just to kind of reiterate what's happening here, getters and setters are run when list value is changed. So if a change is made in list value, because there's two-way binding, if a change is made in list value, the setter is going to run automatically, and the setter says, uh-oh, something's changed, I need to do something, and that's going to fire off this function, which in our case is going to update this variable called list filter, underscore list filter. And then the template realizes that that list filter has changed, so I need to retrieve the new value. So the getter is going to run, which is going to return whatever got put into list value, and therefore rake is going to be displayed here in the filtered by. So getters and setters are run automatically. I cannot have list filter now without the underscore. I have to give it a different name because list filter has to be unique to the getters and setters now. In other words, in order to change list filter, the word list filter, I can only do it via a getter or a setter. I can no longer have access to list filter by itself. In order to change list filter, the property list filter, that word, that variable, I have to do it through getters and setters. And I'm just using this as a placeholder for my, in this case, to change my, to maintain that string that was in this input box. And you'll see very shortly what else I can do with getters and setters, but for now I just needed to set it up and give you that concept that a getter and setter are run automatically when the template needs to, when the template recognizes that list filter was changed. It's also going to run the setter when the template recognizes that list filter was changed and it needs to get that value. So if it needs that value, it's going to run the setter. If list value was changed, it's going to run, I'm sorry, I did that backwards. I apologize. This is confusing enough to say as well as understand, so I recognize that that's challenging. So let me say that one more time. When the template requires that value and it needs to render that value, it's going to run the getter. So I need to get the value of list filter. And in this case, we're returning whatever is inside underscore list filter. If the template recognizes that I'm bound to list filter and list filter has changed, in other words, in our case, somebody typed something in, then I need to run the setter. I'm going to send the setter that change. In this case, it was our string from the list box. And then I'm going to do something, whatever's inside. In our case, we're going to change this underscore list filter to the new value. So getters and setters are run automatically when the template needs to make a change. It recognizes a change, and that's going to run the setter. And when the template needs that data, it's going to run the getter. So in the next video, we'll do a little bit more with our setter, which is going to say, okay, so not only do you need to change this list filter, now we've got to add some logic to filter out our products, which is why we're setting up a setter, because we need to do more than one thing. We're going to have to do some other statements here, which requires a function to run as opposed to a single, just change a single value.